Welcome to the Crow's Tavern. Tonight, we'll journey back to the time of the Norse people, exploring their villages, customs, and daily lives as we drift toward peaceful sleep together. After our story ends, you'll hear the gentle sounds of a crackling fire that will continue for hours without interruption. These soothing sounds will help guide you into a deep and restful sleep. Now let us begin our journey into the Viking world and allow the ancient tales to carry you towards slumber. The copper-gold light of evening streamed through the grand windows of Bilskirnir, Thor's magnificent hall in Asgard. The god of thunder stood at his balcony, gazing out at the rolling fields and distant mountains of the realm eternal. Yet his mind was elsewhere. Despite the peaceful scene before him, Thor's shoulders remained tense, his jaw tight. It had been many months since he had known true rest. Battle after battle had called for Mjolnir's might, from the frost giants of Jotunheim to the fire demons of Muspelheim, all demanding his attention and strength. Thor's hand instinctively moved to Mjolnir, which hung at his side as always. The hammer, sensing its master's touch, hummed softly, a sound that usually brought comfort. Today, however, the familiar vibration only seemed to heighten the restlessness that had been growing within him. There was no enemy to face, no clear threat to overcome, only a persistent weariness that settled deep in his bones, a battlefield he could not simply charge into with hammer raised. A gentle knock at the chamber door broke his reverie. "Enter," Thor called, turning from the view. The door opened to reveal Frigga, the All-Mother, her serene presence immediately softening the tension in the room. "My son," she said warmly, crossing to join him at the balcony. "Your father tells me you have declined the invitation to join tonight's feast." Thor nodded, somewhat reluctantly. "The company would be welcome, but I find little appetite for celebration these days." Frigga studied him with eyes that had watched him grow from child to warrior to protector of realms. "You carry the weight of 9 worlds on your shoulders, Thor. Even the mightiest oak will bend if it never knows the respite of gentle seasons." "There is always another battle," Thor replied, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "Always another threat that requires Mjolnir's answer. And there always will be," Frigga agreed, placing a hand on his arm. "But a warrior who never sheathes his sword becomes nothing more than his blade. You are more than Mjolnir, my son. Perhaps it is time you remembered that." Thor met his mother's gaze, seeing the wisdom and concern there. "What would you have me do? I cannot simply set aside my responsibilities." Frigga smiled, a gentle curve of her lips that held the knowledge of ages. "There is a place, in Vanaheim, where even gods may find respite. A sacred grove tended by the Vanir since before Asgard and Vanaheim made peace. It is said that those who enter with an honest heart leave with a renewed spirit." "Vanaheim," Thor echoed thoughtfully. "The realm of the Vanir gods, masters of fertility, wisdom, and foresight, had long been allied with Asgard. Unlike the thunder and warfare that defined much of Aesir culture, the Vanir were deeply connected to the natural world, to growth and renewal. You believe such a place could offer what I seek?" "I believe," Frigga replied carefully, "that sometimes we must look beyond the familiar to find what we truly need. And I know that even the god of thunder must occasionally put down his hammer if he wishes to remain worthy of lifting it." The truth in her words resonated within Thor. He had faced countless external foes, but this internal battle, against his own restlessness, against the constant call to action that had become so much a part of him, was one he had never fully confronted. "How would I find this grove?" he asked finally. Frigga's expression brightened. "Heimdall knows the way. The grove welcomes those who arrive without weapon or armor, as guest rather than warrior." Thor glanced down at Mjolnir, the faithful hammer that had been his constant companion through countless battles. The thought of setting it aside, even temporarily, created an unexpected tightness in his chest. "Without Mjolnir?" he asked, unable to keep the note of uncertainty from his voice. "The hammer will await your return," Frigga assured him. "Some journeys must be taken with open hands rather than clenched fists." Thor considered her words, looking out once more at the peaceful evening settling over Asgard. Perhaps there was wisdom in this counsel, a different kind of strength to be found than that which he had always relied upon. "Very well," he decided, straightening with new resolve. "I will seek out this grove. If there is peace to be found in Vanaheim, I would welcome it." Frigor smiled, touching his cheek in a gesture reminiscent of his childhood. "Rest is not surrender, my son. Sometimes it is the greatest victory of all." The journey to Vanaheim began at Himinbjorg, Heimdall's fortress at the edge of Asgard, where the Bifrost Bridge extended out into the cosmos. The all-seeing guardian stood as ever at his post, golden eyes fixed on distant stars and realms beyond ordinary sight. "Heimdall," Thor greeted him, the familiar weight of Mjolnir noticeably absent from his belt. In its place, he carried only a simple traveling pack. His usual armor had been exchanged for a plain tunic and trousers, making him appear more like a common traveler than the Prince of Asgard. "Thor Odinson," Heimdall acknowledged with a slight nod. "The All-Mother has spoken to me of your journey." "Then you know where I must go," Thor replied. Heimdall's golden gaze seemed to look through Thor rather than at him. "I see all paths through the 9 realms, but the path you truly seek lies within, not without." Thor had known Heimdall long enough to recognize when the Guardian spoke with purpose beyond simple conversation. "The grove in Vanaheim, will it show me this inner path? The Grove of Twilight Whispers shows each visitor what they need, not necessarily what they seek," Heimdall replied cryptically. "It has stood since before my watch began. The Vanir tend it still, though few now remember its oldest purposes. And how shall I find it once I reach Vanaheim?" Heimdall turned slightly, facing the swirling cosmos beyond the Bifrost. "When you arrive, follow the western river until you reach a forest of silver birch. At its heart, where 3 streams meet beneath the shadow of the World Tree's root, you will find the entrance to the grove." His expression softened almost imperceptibly. "But know this, Odinson. The true entrance lies not in finding the physical place, but in the state of the heart that approaches it." Thor nodded, accepting this counsel without fully understanding it. Throughout his long life, he had learned that some wisdom revealed itself only through experience. "I am ready," he stated simply, standing tall before the Bifrost's gateway. Heimdall stepped to the center of the circular chamber and placed his great sword in the mechanism that controlled the Bifrost. "Safe journey, Thor Odinson. May you find what you need." The rainbow bridge activated, its energies swirling around Thor in a brilliant display of cosmic light. The familiar sensation of Bifrost travel engulfed him. The rush of movement without moving, of seeing everything and nothing simultaneously. For a breathless moment he existed everywhere and nowhere, stretched across the vastness of Yggdrasil's branches. Then, with the gentleness of a leaf settling on still water, Thor arrived in Vanaheim. The difference from Asgard was immediately apparent, where his home realm shone with golden splendor and majesty. Vanaheim embraced a softer beauty. He stood on a grassy hillside, overlooking a vast landscape of rolling meadows and ancient forests. The air itself felt different, richer somehow, filled with the scent of growing things and fertile earth. Above, twin moons hung in a twilight sky that seemed permanently caught in that magical moment between day and night. Neither fully one nor the other. Thor took a deep breath, allowing the peace of the place to wash over him. Already something within him responded to this land. Perhaps the part of him that came from Jord, the earth goddess who was his mother by birth. He had visited Vanaheim before, of course, but always as warrior or diplomat. Never like this, alone and unarmed, seeking not battle or alliance, but something far more personal. Remembering Heimdall's directions, Thor oriented himself by the setting sun and began walking toward the western horizon. Before long, he glimpsed the sparkle of water through the tall grasses. A river, just as Heimdall had described, winding its way through the landscape like a silver thread. The river led him through meadows where wildflowers grew in such profusion that each step released a cloud of subtle fragrance. Small creatures, sensing no threat from the passing god, continued their evening activities undisturbed. Birds swooped low over the water catching insects. Rabbits watched curiously from the safety of their burrows, and once a magnificent stag regarded Thor with ancient eyes before bounding away into the twilight. As the twin moons rose higher, casting their silver beauty light across the landscape, Thor finally saw the forest Heimdall had mentioned. The silver birches stood like sentinels at the edge of a vast woodland, their white trunks luminous in the moonlight, their leaves whispering secrets as a gentle breeze passed through them. Thor paused at the forest's edge, struck by an unexpected feeling of hesitation. Without Mjolnir at his side or armor to protect him, he felt strangely vulnerable. Not physically, for even without his hammer, his godly strength remained, but in some deeper, less definable way. He was entering this place not as Thor, god of thunder, but simply as Thor, a being in search of something he could not name. The true entrance lies not in finding the physical place, but in the state of the heart that approaches it, Heimdall had said. Perhaps this was what the Guardian had meant. Taking another deep breath, Thor stepped beneath the canopy of the silver birches. Inside the forest, the quality of light changed, filtered through countless leaves to create a dappled pattern on the forest floor. The air grew cooler, filled with the scent of moss and rich soil and growing things. The sound of the river remained his guide, though now it was joined by the gentle symphony of the forest at twilight, the rustle of leaves, the occasional call of night birds, the soft padding of unseen creatures through the underbrush. Thor followed the river deeper into the forest, noticing how the trees grew older and more majestic the further he traveled. The silver birches gradually gave way to ancient oaks and ash trees, their massive trunks speaking of centuries of slow, patient growth. The forest floor became a carpet of soft moss that cushioned his steps and seemed to glow with a faint luminescence in the deepening night. After what might have been hours, or merely moments, for time itself seemed to flow differently in this place, Thor heard the musical sound of water meeting water. Following this new sound, he emerged into a clearing where, just as Heimdall had foretold, 3 streams converged beneath the massive root of what could only be a manifestation of Yggdrasil itself. The world tree's root arched overhead like a natural bridge, vast beyond comprehension, yet somehow perfectly scaled to the clearing it sheltered. Beneath it, the 3 streams met in a small, perfectly circular pool, whose surface reflected the twin moons and countless stars with mirror-like perfection. Around the clearing, trees of species Thor had never seen before stood in a protective circle, their branches intertwining overhead to create a living cathedral. The air here was different again, not just the clean scent of forest, but something older, something that spoke of deep magic and ancient wisdom. Thor stood at the edge of the clearing, suddenly certain that he had found the grove of twilight whispers. As if in confirmation, a soft voice spoke from the far side of the pool. "Welcome, son of Odin." Thor turned to see a figure emerge from between 2 ancient trees. At first glance, the being appeared to be an elderly man with a long white beard and simple robes the color of forest shadows. But as he approached, Thor realized that the figure was both more and less than human. His skin had the texture of bark, his hair and beard resembled fine silver moss, and his eyes held the deep green of summer leaves with flecks of gold like sunlight through a canopy. "I am Njord," the figure introduced himself with a slight bow. "Guardian of this grove and keeper of its ancient peace." Thor bowed in return, recognizing the name of one of the most revered of the Vanir gods. "I thank you for your welcome, Lord Njord. I come seeking..." He paused, unsure how to express what had brought him to this place. Njord's weathered face creased in a gentle smile. "I know what you seek, Thunder God, even if you yourself do not yet have words for it. You stand at the threshold of the Grove of Twilight Whispers, where even gods may find respite from the burdens they carry." He gestured toward the pool at the center of the clearing. "These waters reflect more than just the sky above. They show the heart of those who gaze upon them. Would you look, Thor Odinson, and see what they reveal to you?" Thor approached the pool cautiously. Its still surface reflected his face with perfect clarity in the moonlight, but as he continued to gaze into its depths, the reflection began to change. He saw himself in battle, Mjolnir raised high. He saw himself in council with Odin and the other Aesir. He saw himself protecting Midgard from countless threats. In each image, his expression remained the same, determined, focused, powerful, but also increasingly weary beneath the strength. "You carry the weight of your duty well," Njord observed, coming to stand beside him at the pool's edge. "Perhaps too well, for you have begun to forget that even the strongest shield must sometimes be set aside." "I am the protector of the realms," Thor replied, still watching the shifting images in the water. "If I set aside my strength, who will stand against the threats that never cease?" "A valid question," Njord acknowledged. "Yet consider this. Does a warrior who never rests eventually become a danger to those he protects? Does strength without renewal ultimately become weakness?" The images in the pool shifted again, showing Thor in moments he had almost forgotten. Laughing with friends at feast, listening to skalds tell tales of adventure, watching a sunset from Asgard's golden towers with wonder rather than vigilance. Simple moments of peace amidst his warrior's life. "The Grove offers no easy answers," Njord continued. "Only the opportunity to remember what may have been forgotten in the clamor of duty and expectation. If you wish to enter fully, you must leave behind not just your hammer and armor, but also the weight of being Thor, god of thunder. if only for a time. Thor looked up from the pool to meet Njord's ancient gaze. And how does one leave behind what has become the very essence of oneself? Njord's smile deepened, crinkling the bark-like texture of his face, by remembering that before you were the god of thunder, before you were Odin's son or Asgard's champion, you were simply yourself, a being of consciousness and potential like any other. He gestured toward an opening between two massive trees that Thor hadn't noticed before. The heart of the grove lies beyond. Enter with an open mind, and perhaps you will rediscover what has been obscured by the mantle you carry. Thor straightened, squaring his shoulders as if preparing for battle, before catching himself with a rueful smile. Even here, his instincts remained those of a warrior. Perhaps that was precisely what Njord meant. He had worn his role for so long that it had become difficult to separate the thunder god from the being beneath. "I will try," he promised, approaching the pathway Njord had indicated. "That is all anyone can do," Njord replied sagely. "Even gods." As Thor passed between the ancient trees, the atmosphere changed subtly. The air grew warmer, filled with a sweet fragrance like honey and summer herbs. The path beneath his feet transitioned from forest moss to soft, silver-green grass that seemed to embrace each step. Above, the canopy opened to reveal a sky where stars burned with impossible brightness, casting enough light to illuminate the glade he had entered. This inner sanctum of the grove was a perfect circle of gently rolling land, surrounded by trees whose species Thor could not identify. Their bark shimmered with an inner light, and their leaves rustled with whispers that almost, but not quite, formed words in languages older than time itself. At the center of the glade stood a single tree, larger and more ancient than any Thor had ever encountered. Unlike the others, this central tree bore no leaves. Its massive trunk and sprawling branches were silvery white, resembling the bones of some primordial being more than living wood. Yet it was unquestionably alive. Thor could sense a vast consciousness within it, sleeping yet aware, ancient beyond reckoning. As Thor approached this central tree, the whispers from the surrounding grove grew more distinct, forming a gentle chorus that seemed to welcome him while urging caution and respect. The silver-white tree itself remained silent, but Thor felt its awareness shift slightly toward him, like an ancient being opening one eye to regard an unexpected visitor. At the base of the great tree lay a circular depression in the earth, lined with the same soft silver-green grass that covered the glade. It formed a natural seat, perfectly sized for a being of Thor's stature. Without being told, Thor understood that this was where he was meant to rest. Settling himself at the base of the ancient tree, Thor straightened his back and placed his hands on his knees, assuming a position of meditation he had observed but rarely practiced himself. The moment he closed his eyes, the whispering of the grove changed tone, becoming rhythmic, like the drawing and release of breath. "Listen," a voice seemed to say, though whether it came from the trees or from within his own mind, Thor could not tell. "Listen to the breath of the world." Thor focused on the rhythmic sound, allowing his own breathing to synchronize with it. Inhale as the whispers rose, exhale as they fell, so simple, yet requiring a conscious attention that he rarely gave to such an automatic function. "The first lesson," the voice continued, "is presence. You exist in this moment, neither in the battles of yesterday nor the conflicts of tomorrow. Only here, only now." The concept was foreign to Thor's warrior mindset, which constantly evaluated past victories for future strategies. always anticipating the next threat. To exist solely in the present moment felt strangely vulnerable, like lowering a shield in the midst of battle. Yet, as he continued to breathe in rhythm with the grove, Thor began to notice details he would ordinarily overlook. The subtle variations in the whispering leaves, the warmth of the earth beneath him, the play of starlight through branches, the coolness of air filling his lungs. Each sensation existed in perfect detail for a moment before transitioning to the next. A continuous flow of experience, unmarred by concern for what had been or what might come. Time passed differently in the heart of the grove. What might have been minutes or hours seemed simultaneously brief and eternal. Thor remained seated at the base of the ancient tree, his consciousness expanding in ways he had never experienced through battle or feasting, or any of the other activities that typically filled his existence. Gradually, a new awareness crept into his meditation. A subtle tension in his shoulders, a tightness in his jaw that he maintained even here, in this place of perfect safety. The habits of vigilance ran deep, it seemed. The second lesson, the voice whispered, is release. That which you hold holds you in turn. With this prompt, Thor consciously relaxed his shoulders, unclenched his jaw, released the subtle battle readiness that had become so natural he no longer noticed its constant presence. The effect was immediate and profound, a wave of relief washing through his body, as if he had put down a weight carried for so long he'd forgotten it was not part of himself. This is what it means to truly rest, the voice continued. Not merely the absence of activity, but the presence of peace. Thor found himself smiling at the simplicity and profundity of this statement. How long had it been since he had known true peace? Not the temporary respite between conflicts, but the deep-rooted serenity that came from within rather than without. As this question formed in his mind, the great tree against which he leaned seemed to respond. A warmth spread from its trunk into Thor's back, and with it came images, not like the visions in Njord's pool, but more like memories, though not all were his own. He saw a much younger version of himself, barely more than a child by Asgardian standards, sitting beside a stream in a sun-dappled forest. His small hands worked intently, weaving reeds into what might charitably be called a basket, though its crooked form would hold little. Nearby, a woman watched with loving eyes. Frigga, teaching patience through simple crafts. The scene shifted to a hall in Asgard, where an adolescent Thor sat unusually still, entranced by a visiting skald whose tales of ancient heroes held the young god spellbound. For those hours, the restless energy that typically defined him had been quieted by the simple power of story. Another shift brought an image of Thor in his early adulthood, lying on his back atop one of Asgard's golden towers, watching cosmic energies paint the night sky in rippling curtains of color. His expression in that moment held wonder rather than assessment, appreciation rather than analysis of potential threat. These moments of peace had existed throughout his life, Thor realized, not absent, but increasingly overshadowed by duty and expectation as he grew into his role as Asgard's defender. The capacity for stillness had always been within him. It had simply been forgotten, like a language once known but fallen into disuse. The third lesson, the voice whispered, is remembrance. What seems lost may simply be waiting to be rediscovered. With these words, the ancient tree's presence in Thor's mind deepened. The images now came not from his own past, but from a consciousness far older than his own. Thor experienced, as if they were his own memories, the slow turning of countless seasons, the patient growth from sapling to ancient sentinel, the deep peace of roots spreading through welcoming soil, while branches reached towards stars that wheeled in cosmic dance. Time measured not in days or years, but in centuries, millennia. The perspective of a being for whom 100 years passed like a single day for a god, and 1,000 years like a handful of moments. Not a lesser awareness than Thor's own, but fundamentally different, broader, deeper, infinitely more patient. This is how a tree knows rest, the voice explained, not as cessation, but as steady being. Growth continues, leaves fall and return, storms come and pass, yet the tree remains, rooted in the eternal now. Thor opened his eyes, understanding blossoming within him. The grove around him seemed more vibrant now, every detail sharper, every whisper clearer. The ancient silver-white tree loomed above, majestic in its stillness, powerful not despite its immobility, but because of it. I begin to understand. Thor spoke aloud for the first time since entering the heart of the grove. True rest is not weakness, but a different kind of strength. As if in response to his words, a gentle breeze passed through the glade, setting the leaves to dancing and casting moving patterns of starlight across the silver-green grass. The whispers of the grove rose briefly in what felt like approval, or perhaps encouragement. Thor closed his eyes once more, settling deeper into his meditation. This time, rather than receiving guidance from the voice or visions from the tree, he simply existed in the moment, fully present in a way he had not been since childhood. His breath synchronized naturally with the rhythm of the grove, his heartbeat slowed to match some deeper cosmic pulse that flowed through the roots beneath him, and a profound sense of connection replaced the isolation he hadn't realized he carried. In that stillness, Thor found not emptiness, but fullness. A direct experience of life, unfiltered by expectation or identity. He was not the god of thunder in this moment, nor Odin's son, nor Asgard's champion. He was simply a conscious being among countless others, sharing in the great mystery of existence. How long he remained in this state, Thor could not have said. Time itself seemed an arbitrary concept within the heart of the grove. Eventually, however, he became aware of a gentle touch on his shoulder. Opening his eyes, he found Njord standing before him. The ancient Vanir's expression one of quiet approval. "You have done well, Thor Odinson," Njord said softly. Few who enter the heart of the grove achieve such stillness on their first visit. Thor rose to his feet, surprised to find his body light and energized, despite having sat immobile for what must have been hours. No stiffness troubled his muscles, no fog clouded his mind. Quite the opposite. He felt clearer, more present, more wholly himself than he had in longer than he could remember. "I had forgotten that such peace was possible," Thor admitted, glancing up at the great silver-white tree with newfound respect. "Or perhaps I never truly knew it at all." Njord nodded in understanding. "When one wields the hammer of storms, it is easy to forget the calm at the eye of the tempest. Yet both are essential aspects of the same power." He gestured toward the path that had brought Thor to this inner sanctum. "Dawn approaches in the outer world. Would you walk with me as I tend to the grove's morning rituals?" Thor nodded, falling into step beside the ancient Vanir as they followed a different path than the one he had entered by. This new trail wound among trees that seemed to grow more awake as they passed, their luminescence dimming as true daylight began to filter through the canopy above. The lessons you have begun to learn here need not end when you leave this place, Njord observed as they walked. The capacity for stillness remains within you, regardless of where you journey. But how does one maintain such peace amidst battle? Thor asked. When threats arise that must be answered with strength. Njord smiled, his bark-like features crinkling in the growing light. Consider the mighty oak in a storm. Its branches may whip and bend with violent force, yet its core remains steady, its roots unmoved. Action need not preclude centeredness. They emerged into a smaller clearing, where a natural spring bubbled up from between moss-covered stones, forming a stream that presumably joined one of the 3 Thor had seen at the grove's entrance. Njord knelt beside the spring, cupping his hands beneath the clear water before raising them to his lips, drinking deeply. He gestured for Thor to do the same. The water tasted like nothing Thor had ever experienced, impossibly pure, carrying subtle flavors of minerals and earth, with an underlying sweetness reminiscent of summer fruit. As he drank, a tingling sensation spread throughout his body, as if every cell were being gently awakened and refreshed. The waters of the grove carry its essence, Njord explained, seeing Thor's reaction. They remind the body of its connection to the greater whole. In ancient days, even Odin came here to drink before undertaking his longest journeys. This revelation surprised Thor. His father had never mentioned visits to this sacred place, though that was perhaps unsurprising. Odin kept many experiences to himself, revealing only what he deemed necessary for others to know. As they continued their morning walk, Njord stopped occasionally to tend to plants that grew along the path, straightening a bent stem here, removing a withered leaf there, murmuring quiet words of encouragement to seedlings just breaking through the soil. His movements were unhurried yet perfectly efficient, each action flowing naturally into the next with no wasted effort. This too is a form of meditation, the Vanir explained without pausing in his work. Mindful action in service to life. Thor observed carefully, seeing how Njord moved through the grove not as separate from it, but as an integrated part of its existence. There was a lesson here as well, he realized, about the relationship between beings and their environment, about care as a form of strength, about service as a path to purpose. In Asgard, Thor reflected aloud, we honor the warrior's path above all. Strength in battle, courage in the face of enemies, unyielding will against opposition. These are the virtues we celebrate in our sagas and songs. Njord nodded as he gently freed a sapling from the strangling grip of an overgrown vine. And these are worthy virtues, for they have their season and purpose. The Vanir do not deny the necessity of protection and defense. He straightened, fixing Thor with his ancient leaf-green gaze. Yet consider, what are you protecting if not life itself? And how can you truly value what you defend if you never fully experience its nature? The question resonated deeply within Thor. How often had he fought to protect realms and peoples without taking time to truly know what he was fighting for? His visits to Midgard, for instance, were almost exclusively in response to threats. He rarely lingered to experience the richness of human existence when no danger loomed. I believe, Thor said slowly, thinking as he spoke, that I have been half blind, seeing duty without its purpose, battle without its meaning. He looked around at the grove, now fully illuminated by morning light that transformed its mysterious nighttime beauty into equally captivating daytime splendor. This place has given me more than rest, it has given me perspective. Njord smiled, his ancient face alight with genuine pleasure. Then you have received the grove's greatest gift. Many come seeking mere relief from weariness, but few recognize the deeper offering, a renewed understanding of why we walk the paths we have chosen. Their circuit of the grove had brought them back toward the entrance, where the three streams met beneath Yggdrasil's root. The pool at their convergence now caught morning light rather than moonlight, its surface dancing with bright reflections, rather than the still, mirror-like quality of the previous night. Before you return to your duties, Njord said, there is one final tradition observed by those who visit the Grove of Twilight Whispers. From within his robes, he produced a small object that he handed to Thor. It was a seed, larger than an acorn but similar in shape, with a pearlescent surface that seemed to shift colors as it caught the light. Despite its small size, it carried a surprising weight in Thor's palm, as if it contained more substance than its dimensions suggested. This is a seed from the heart tree itself, Njord explained, indicating the great silver-white tree at the center of the inner sanctum. Such seeds are given only rarely, and only to those the grove itself deems worthy. Plant it where you wish to create a place of peace, and a daughter tree will grow. Not as vast or ancient as its parent, but carrying something of its essence. Thor curled his fingers carefully around the seed, recognizing the significance of such a gift. I am honored beyond words, Lord Njord. I will ensure it finds worthy soil. I believe you will, Njord agreed. And when the pressures of your duties threaten to overwhelm, you might visit the place where it grows. Even a moment in the presence of such a tree can help one remember the stillness at the core of all things. They had reached the very edge of the grove now, where the forest of silver birches began once more. Thor could see the meadows beyond, bathed in morning light, the river continuing its journey through the landscape. The path back to the Bifrost site lies that way, Njord said, pointing along the river's course. Though if you wish to remain longer, the grove welcomes your presence. Thor held on to him for a moment. Part of him longed to stay, to explore more deeply the peace he had found in this place. Yet he also felt a renewed sense of purpose, an eagerness to return to his responsibilities with fresh perspective. I must return, he decided finally. There are duties that await me, but I will carry what I have learned here with me. Njord bowed slightly in acknowledgement. Then, until our paths cross again, Thor Odinson, may you find the balance between action and stillness, between strength and peace, between protecting life and living it fully yourself. Thor returned the bow with deep respect. Thank you for your guidance, Lord Njord. Vanaheim is fortunate in its guardians. With these parting words, Thor turned and began his journey back through the forest of silver birches. The seed rested safely in a pouch at his belt, its weight a constant reminder of the grove's gift. His steps were measured and deliberate now, aware of the ground beneath his feet, the air against his skin, the sounds and scents of the forest around him, present in a way he had rarely been before. When he reached the meadows beyond the forest, Thor paused to look back. From this distance, the Grove of Twilight Whispers appeared as simply another woodland in Vanaheim's landscape, its extraordinary nature hidden from casual observation. Yet Thor knew that appearances could be deceiving. The most profound experiences often came wrapped in ordinary seeming, just as the mightiest oak began as an unremarkable acorn. The journey back to the Bifrost site gave Thor time to consider where he might plant the precious seed he carried. Asgard seemed the obvious choice, perhaps near his personal chambers where he could visit it daily. Yet something about this felt wrong. Too private, too exclusive for a gift meant to bring peace to more than just himself. As Thor walked, an idea began to form in his mind. There was a place on Midgard, a high promontory overlooking both mountains and sea, where he had occasionally paused during his journeys. The site was remote enough to remain undisturbed by human activity, yet accessible to those who might truly seek its solace. There, a daughter of the heart tree could grow, offering its gifts to any who approached with open minds and peaceful intentions, whether they be gods, mortals, or other beings who walked between realms. Yes, Thor decided. That would be the perfect location, a bridge between worlds, just as he himself often served as a bridge between the concerns of gods and the needs of mortals. By the time he reached the Bifrost site, the twin suns of Vanaheim were high in the sky. Thor stood at the center of the intricate pattern burned into the ground by the Rainbow Bridge's previous activation, ready to return to Asgard and, eventually, to the responsibilities that awaited him there. But he would return changed, not weakened as he might once have feared, but strengthened in ways that had nothing to do with physical might or storm-calling power. The capacity for stillness that he had rediscovered would serve him as faithfully as Mjolnir, though in different circumstances and toward different ends. Emdal, Thor called, knowing the all-seeing guardian would hear him across the vast distances between realms. I am ready to return. The sky above him darkened as clouds gathered with supernatural speed. A column of rainbow light descended, enveloping Thor in its brilliance. As the Bifrost transported him home, Thor carried with him not just the seed from the heart tree, but the seeds of a new understanding. That true strength encompassed not only the power to change what must be changed, but also the wisdom to accept what merely is, and the discernment to know the difference between the two. When Thor materialized in Heimdall's observatory at the edge of Asgard, the Guardian regarded him with knowing golden eyes. You found what you sought, Heimdall observed. It was not a question. I found what I needed, Thor corrected with a smile, though it was not what I thought I sought. Heimdall nodded, a rare smile briefly crossing his usually stoic features. Such is often the way of the grove. Thor clasped forearms with the Guardian in the traditional warrior's greeting, then turned toward the rainbow bridge that would take him back to Asgard proper. In the distance, the golden spires of the realm eternal gleamed in the sunlight, as magnificent as ever, yet somehow different, through Thor's renewed perspective. Not just a fortress to be defended, but a home to be cherished, not merely a symbol of power, but a center of life in all its complexity. Mjolnir awaited him in his chambers, faithful hammer ready to be wielded once more against whatever threats might arise. Thor would take it up again, resuming his role as protector with undiminished commitment. But now, alongside the thunder and lightning that were his birthright, he carried a new power, the quiet strength of stillness, the deepening roots of patience, the towering resilience that comes not from resistance, but from acceptance. The god of thunder walked the rainbow bridge toward home, his step light despite the weighty understanding he now carried. Above him, galaxies wheeled in their cosmic dance, while below, the waters of infinity cascaded over the edge of Asgard into the void, and somewhere in the vast branches of Yggdrasil, the grove of twilight whispers continued its ancient existence, offering its gifts to those who approached with honest hearts, gods and mortals alike. In his palm, Thor felt the subtle pulse of the heart tree's seed, life waiting patiently for its moment to grow, power held in perfect balance between potential and manifestation. Much like peace itself, he reflected, always available to those who sought it with sincere intention, always waiting just beneath the surface of even the most turbulent existence. The golden gates of Asgard opened before him, and Thor, renewed in spirit if not changed in appearance, returned to the duties and relationships that defined his place in the cosmos. But he carried with him now a piece of Vanaheim's tranquility, not as a memory that would fade with time, but as a living practice that would continue to grow and deepen, like the daughter tree he would soon plant on that distant Midgard promontory, a bridge between realms, and a reminder of the peace that lies at the heart of all things. As Thor departed from the sacred grove of Twilight Whispers, the seed of the heart tree safely tucked against his side, his thoughts turned toward the connection between realms. The peace he had discovered in Vanaheim's tranquil forest had transformed him, teaching him that true strength could be found in stillness as well as action. The god of thunder gazed up at the vast expanse of stars visible from the Bifrost site, pondering where next his journeys might take him. While the forests of Vanaheim had offered their wisdom through ancient trees and whispering leaves, there were other elemental forces in the Nine Realms, each with their own profound lessons to impart. "Deceive," Thor murmured to himself, remembering tales his mother Frigga had told him in childhood. Aegir's domain holds mysteries as deep as any forest grove. The thought settled comfortably in his mind as the Bifrost activated, rainbow light engulfing him for the journey back to Asgard. Perhaps after planting the heart tree's seed on that promontory overlooking Midgard's ocean, he might seek wisdom not from the land, but from the vast waters that surrounded it. Aegir, the ancient sea god, keeper of the brewing cauldron and host to both Aesir and Vanir in his underwater halls. What insights might his realm offer to one who had begun to understand the value of depths beneath surfaces? As Thor materialized in Hengdal's observatory, this new possibility shimmered in his thoughts like sunlight on waves. The tranquility of Vanaheim would remain with him, a foundation upon which new understanding could build, but the rhythmic depths of Aegir's domain called with their own siren song of mystery and wonder. The oceanic dream awaited, its tides already pulling at the edges of Thor's consciousness, promising new horizons beyond the forest's edge. The great hall of Valhalla echoed with the sounds of celebration. Warriors laughed and feasted, their voices rising to the rafters in song and story. At the high table, Odin watched over his Einherjar, his single eye gleaming with satisfaction at their merriment. Beside him, Thor sat in uncharacteristic silence, his usually boisterous demeanor subdued. The god of thunder's mighty hands rested heavily on the table before him, and though a full flagon of mead remained untouched at his elbow, his gaze seemed fixed on something distant, beyond the walls of the hall. Odin observed his son for a long moment before speaking. "Your thoughts wander far from our feast tonight," he noted, his voice low enough that only Thor could hear him over the revelry. Thor stirred, turning to meet his father's penetrating stare. "Forgive me," he said, straightening his shoulders. "I find myself weary." The admission seemed to cost him something, as though acknowledging fatigue was itself a form of defeat. Thor, son of Odin, god of thunder and protector of both Asgard and Midgard, was not one to recognize limits in himself, or at least not one to speak of them aloud. Odin's weathered face softened slightly. "Even the mightiest river must sometimes slow its course," he said. "You have fought many battles in recent moons. Jotunheim's frost giants, Surtur's fiery minions, the dwarven forgers to reclaim the Heartstone. Each victory earned through strength and will. Thor nodded slowly, his hand moving unconsciously to Mjolnir, which hung at his belt. The hammer seemed to pulse faintly, as if in agreement with Odin's words. There is always another threat, another challenge that requires Mjolnir's thunder, Thor said. I do not resent this duty, Father. I embrace it. And yet the warrior who never rests eventually falls, Odin finished for him. This is not weakness, my son. This is wisdom. Around them, the celebration continued unabated. Warriors reenacted their greatest battles, their exaggerated movements casting huge shadows on the walls. Valkyries moved amongst the tables, refilling flagons and joining in songs of heroism and glory. None seemed to notice the quiet conversation between the All-Father and his son. What would you have me do? Thor asked finally. I cannot simply set aside my responsibilities. If enemies of Asgard sense hesitation or absence, Viber will find other defenders ready. Odin interrupted. Asgard does not rely solely on your hammer, formidable though it is. He stroked his beard thoughtfully. There are different forms of renewal, different paths to restoration. For some, battle itself provides the necessary fire. For others, contemplation and stillness offer what is needed. Thor looked skeptical. Stillness has never been my strength. A rare smile crossed Odin's face. Perhaps that is precisely why you require it now. He leaned closer. I received word from Heimdall this morning. Aegir sends an invitation. Egil? Thor's interest visibly quickened at the mention of the ancient sea god. What business does the Lord of the Ocean Depths have with Asgard? Not with Asgard, Odin corrected. With you specifically. He extends an offer of hospitality, a respite among the waves, away from the constant vigilance required here. Thor frowned. Is this your doing, Father? Did you suggest this invitation? Odin shook his head. The sea god's wisdom works in its own currents, much like my own. That your need and his offer align speaks of greater patterns, perhaps. He gestured around the hall. You find no rest here, surrounded by reminders of battle and duty. Perhaps the rhythm of Aegir's realm offers what Valhalla cannot. Thor considered this, turning the flagon before him without drinking. The thought of leaving Asgard, of temporarily stepping away from his role as protector, both unsettled and tempted him. The constant readiness, the vigilance required of Asgard's greatest warrior, had worn grooves in his spirit like water cutting through stone over centuries. How long has it been since you truly rested, my son? Odin asked quietly. Not merely between battles, but deeply, completely, allowing your mind the same renewal you grant your body through food and drink. Thor had no immediate answer. Time flowed differently for the Aesir than for mortal beings, but even measured against their long lives, it had been... He could not recall. The realization disturbed him more than he expected. Aegir's invitation is well-timed, Thor admitted finally. Though I wonder what the sea god seeks in return. His generosity typically comes with expectation. Odin nodded, acknowledging the truth in Thor's caution. Aegir, ancient and powerful, ruler of the ocean depths, was known for his magnificent feasts and generous hospitality, but also for his subtle bargains and long memory for both favors and slights. Hamflager's only change mentions only that the sea has been restless of late, Odin said. Perhaps he seeks assurance that Asgard remains watchful of all realms, including his watery domain. Or perhaps the All-Father paused, his single eye distant with thought. Perhaps even gods as old as the oceans themselves occasionally desire company that understands the weight of great power and responsibility. Thor absorbed this, still uncertain, and if urgent need arises while I am in Aeljer's realm, Heimdall's gaze penetrates even the deepest waters, Odin assured him, and you would hardly be the first of the Aesir to answer a summons from battle while enjoying Aeger's hospitality. Decision crystallized in Thor's mind, his natural decisiveness reasserting itself. Very well, I will accept Aeger's invitation for a time. He straightened, some of his customary confidence returning. When does the sea god expect an answer? The tide that will carry you to his halls reaches Asgard's shore at dawn, Odin replied. A ship awaits that none need sail, for it knows its own course through Aegir's domain. Thor raised an eyebrow at this. Convenient, he noted, a touch of his usual wry humor returning. Though I confess some disappointment, navigating uncertain waters has its own satisfaction. I suspect you will find other challenges in Aegir's realm, Odin said. Not all tests come in the form of enemies to be defeated, my son. Thor nodded, accepting both the wisdom and the warning in his father's words. He raised his flagon at last, drinking deeply before standing. Then I shall prepare for morning's journey. If I am to be a guest in the sea god's hall, I should bring gifts worthy of his hospitality. Odin inclined his head in approval. A wise approach. Aeger appreciates thoughtful offerings, particularly those that show understanding of his nature. Thor moved to leave but paused at his father's next words. Remember, Thor. True strength sometimes lies in surrender, not resistance. The mightiest oak that refuses to bend may break in storms that the supple reeds survive. Thor considered this cryptic advice, recognizing it as one of the rare occasions when Odin shared the deeper wisdom gained through his own sacrifices and trials. He acknowledged it with a respectful nod before striding from the hall, his mind already turning to preparations for the unexpected journey ahead. The sound of celebration faded behind him as Thor made his way through Asgard's golden passages, his footsteps echoing against polished floors. Guards inclined their heads as he passed, but none interrupted his thoughtful solitude. Word of his imminent departure would spread quickly enough without his announcement. In his chambers, Thor moved with practiced efficiency, selecting only what was necessary for his journey. Unlike many of the Aesir, he preferred simplicity in his personal belongings. Mjolnir, of course, would accompany him. The hammer was as much a part of him as his own arm. Beyond that, he chose a cloak that could withstand both sea spray and deeper submersion. Boots crafted by dwarven artisans to adapt to their wearers' needs, and a simple change of clothing. For Aegir's gifts, Thor considered longer. The sea god's tastes were refined through eons of collecting treasures from every realm touched by water, which was to say, all of them. What could the god of thunder offer that the lord of the ocean depths would truly value? Duration came, as Thor's gaze fell upon a small chest, nearly forgotten on a high shelf. Inside lay artifacts from his many journeys across the 9 realms. Not trophies of battle, but smaller remembrances. Stones with unusual properties, seeds from remarkable plants. Fragments that held stories rather than obvious value. From this collection, Thor selected 3 items: a perfectly spherical stone from Muspelheim, that, despite its fiery origin, remained cool to the touch and seemed to capture the essence of stars in its depths. A vial of rare air from the highest peak in Alfheim, said to carry whispers of elven songs to those who knew how to listen, and a small piece of metal from Nidavellir that resonated with harmonic tones when touched by water, creating melodies no composer had written. These he arranged carefully in a simple wooden box, carved with his own symbol, a lightning bolt crossed with a hammer. Aegir, who appreciated the unique and the meaningful over mere displays of wealth, would understand the consideration behind such gifts. Preparations complete, Thor moved to his balcony, gazing out over Asgard's eternal twilight. The golden city spread before him, its spires reaching towards stars that seemed close enough to touch. In the distance, the rainbow bridge stretched toward Heimdall's observatory, a constant reminder of the connections between the 9 realms that it was his duty to protect. From this vantage, Thor could just make out the shoreline where the waters of Asgard met the cosmic sea, the boundary where Aegir's influence began. Tomorrow he would cross that threshold, temporarily exchanging the responsibilities of the god of thunder for the uncommon experience of being merely a guest in another's realm. The thought was both unsettling and, unexpectedly, appealing. Thor watched the distant waters shimmer under Asgard's celestial light and allowed himself to wonder what awaited him in Aegir's domain. What forms of rest he might find in the endless rhythm of the ocean's depths. With dawn's first light sliding across Asgard's golden spires, Thor stood at the shore where the enchanted ship awaited. The vessel was smaller than he expected, seemingly designed for a single passenger, and constructed of a pale wood that shimmered with an inner light. Intricate carvings adorned its hull, depicting scenes of ocean life so detailed that the creatures seemed to move when viewed from different angles. No oars or sail were visible, yet the boat rested perfectly stable against the pier, as if patiently awaiting its passenger. Thor secured his modest belongings and Aegir's gift in the vessel's small forward compartment, then glanced back toward the city. He had half expected someone to come bid him farewell, perhaps warriors 3 or Sift, but the shore remained empty save for himself and a few early rising seabirds that wheeled overhead. Word of his temporary departure had spread throughout Asgard's halls by nightfall, but everyone seemed to understand his need for solitude. Even Odin had said his farewells the previous evening, offering no further advice beyond a knowing look that Thor was still contemplating. Well then, Thor murmured to no one in particular, let us see what currents Aegir sends to guide me. As he stepped into the boat, it responded immediately to his presence. The wood beneath his feet warmed slightly, and the vessel eased away from the pier of its own accord, requiring neither sail to catch the wind nor oar to push against the water. It moved with fluid grace, quickly finding a current invisible to Thor's eyes that carried them steadily away from Asgard's shore. Thor settled himself in the center of the craft, Mjolnir resting beside him. Rather than feeling vulnerable without control of his journey, he found himself oddly at peace with the arrangement. There was a certain freedom in surrender to another's expertise, especially when that other was an entity as ancient and fundamental as Aegir, whose very essence was intertwined with the waters that connected all realms. As Asgard receded behind him, the character of the sea changed. The waters darkened and deepened, shifting from the familiar coastal hues to something more profound and mysterious. Above, the sky transformed as well. Asgard's eternal golden twilight gave way to a canopy of stars more numerous and brilliant than those visible from shore, creating patterns unfamiliar even to Thor's experienced eye. Time became difficult to track in this transitional space between realms. Thor found himself watching the play of starlight on water, hypnotized by patterns that formed and dissolved without repetition. The steady motion of the boat, a gentle rise and fall with occasional smooth turns as it followed its predetermined course, created a rhythm that seemed to synchronize with his breathing. Gradually, Thor became aware of subtle changes in the environment. The air carried new scents, salt, yes, but also hints of aromas he could not name, elements perhaps unique to the deepest parts of the ocean. The water's color shifted again, taking on luminescent qualities that illuminated the hull from below. Occasionally, shadowy forms moved beneath the surface, enormous shapes that could have been great sea creatures or something else entirely, but none approached the vessel or disturbed its passage. As the journey extended, Thor found his thoughts drifting like the boat itself. The constant vigilance that had become second nature began to ease, allowing his mind to wander down pathways normally closed by necessity. He remembered battles long past, friends lost and found again, quiet moments between great events that often escaped his recollection. Without conscious intent, he found himself reviewing not just recent challenges, but the longer arc of his existence, patterns and choices that had shaped him into the deity he had become. The sky above had completed its transformation, now displaying constellations entirely unknown in Asgard's night. These stars seemed to move with subtle purpose, occasionally forming momentary symbols or figures, before dissolving back into apparent randomness. Thor wondered if there were messages in these celestial shifts, communications perhaps, from Aegir himself, or from other entities that dwelled in the spaces between established realms. A sound gradually penetrated Thor's contemplative state, a low, rhythmic tone that seemed to emanate from the water itself. It reminded him vaguely of the ceremonial horns sometimes blown in Asgard's greatest halls, but with qualities unique to its watery origin. The sound grew stronger, resonating through the wooden hull and into Thor's body, vibrating at a frequency that seemed to align with his heartbeat. Ahead, where moments before there had been only open water, a form began to materialize from the misty air. First visible as merely a darker shape against the horizon, it quickly resolved into a distinctive silhouette. A massive structure that appeared to be part natural formation and part deliberate construction, rising directly from the sea, spires of coral and stone intertwined with pillars of what might have been solidified water, creating a palace both alien and strangely welcoming. As the enchanted vassal approached this extraordinary structure, Thor noted how the water surrounding it behaved differently, flowing in patterns that defied normal currents, sometimes even appearing to move upward against the natural pull of gravity. Light emanated from within the structure, not the warm gold of Asgard's halls, but a cooler blue-green radiance that pulsed with the same rhythm as the ongoing tonal sound. The boat adjusted its course with perfect precision, heading directly toward what appeared to be an opening at the water level of the palace. This entrance expanded as they approached, the surrounding materials flowing like liquid despite their apparently solid nature, creating a passage just large enough to accommodate the vessel. Thor straightened as they passed through this unusual threshold, alert but not alarmed. The boat navigated a series of winding channels that served as waterways within Aegir's domain, passing through spaces that defied Thor's understanding of architecture. Some chambers appeared boundless, with ceilings so high they disappeared into misty darkness. while others created the impression of being deep underwater despite the fact that he breathed normally. Throughout this journey through Aegir's palace, Thor caught glimpses of inhabitants, figures that moved with fluid grace along the edges of his vision but never approached directly. Some appeared humanoid, while others took forms more akin to the creatures of the deep ocean. All seemed to note his passage with interest, but maintained a respectful distance. Finally, the boat entered a vast circular chamber and came to a gentle stop beside a platform that extended just above the water's surface. The rhythmic tone that had accompanied Thor's approach now resolved into distinct notes that formed a simple but haunting melody, welcoming yet tinged with the ancient solemnity appropriate to a meeting between powers of their stature. Thor Odinson arrives at the threshold of the deep halls, announced a voice that seemed to come from the water itself. Neither male nor female, but carrying the unmistakable authority of a herald. Aegir, Lord of the ocean depths, master of the hidden currents, keeper of the sea's memory, grants welcome and offers peace beneath his waves. Thor gathered Mjolnir and his offerings, then stepped from the boat onto the platform with the dignified bearing appropriate to this formal welcome. The platform, which had appeared to be stone, yielded slightly beneath his weight, like living tissue before firming again. Another reminder that in Aegir's realm, even the seemingly solid might follow different rules than those of Asgard. As if responding to an unspoken cue, the far side of the chamber transformed. What had appeared to be a solid wall of coral and pearl flowed aside, revealing an entryway framed by pillars that resembled frozen waves caught at the moment of breaking. Beyond this impressive entrance, a figure approached, tall and imposing, moving with the unstoppable grace of the tide itself. Aegir, ancient god of the sea, embodied his domain in every aspect. His form was generally humanoid, but with proportions that shifted subtly as he moved, giving the impression that he was composed of water, temporarily choosing a solid shape. His skin held the deep blue-green of the ocean abyss, occasionally revealing patterns beneath that resembled currents or sea creatures. Hair that might have been mistaken for a mane of white flowed around his head and shoulders, sometimes behaving like hair and sometimes like sea foam or flowing water. His eyes contained the full depth of the oceans, shifting between colors, but always with the intensity of primal forces contained within conscious control. He wore robes that seemed woven from the essence of water itself, adorned with patterns that represented every being that called the ocean home, from the smallest plankton to the greatest leviathans. Around his neck hung a pendant that appeared to be a perfect sphere of water somehow held in permanent form, containing within it a miniature representation of all the world's oceans in constant flowing motion. Thor, son of Odin. Aegir's voice carried the rolling depth of waves against the shore, powerful yet measured. Your presence honors my halls. It has been many tides since the Thunderer last sought the company of the sea. Thor inclined his head with genuine respect. Despite being among the most powerful of Asgard's deities, he recognized that Aegir belonged to an older category of beings. Elemental forces that had taken consciousness and form long before the establishment of the 9 realms as currently understood. Lord Aegir, Thor responded formally, I bring greetings from Asgard and gratitude for your invitation. Your generosity in opening your realm to me is noted and appreciated. He extended the wooden box containing his offerings. I bring gifts, though modest compared to the wonders of your domain. A year approached with the fluid motion characteristic of his nature and accepted the offered container. As his fingers touched the carved wood, tiny ripples spread across his skin as if his physical form momentarily acknowledged its liquid essence. Gifts freely given are never measured by their origin, but by the thought within them, Aegir replied, opening the box with careful consideration. As he examined each item, his expression showed genuine appreciation. When he touched the resonating metal from Nidavellir, it immediately responded to his watery essence, producing a complex melody that briefly filled the chamber before subsiding to a pleasant undertone. You understand the nature of appropriate offerings, Aegir noted with approval, not displays of power or wealth, which mean little to one whose domain contains treasures from every age of the world, but rather objects of meaning and harmony. He closed the box with care. These shall be placed among my valued collections, with the tale of their giving preserved. With formalities properly observed, Aegir's manner shifted subtly toward the more personal. Come, Thunderer. You did not journey to my realm merely to exchange courtesies, nor did I extend invitation without purpose. Let us speak more comfortably. He gestured, and the chamber transformed around them. The formal reception area flowed and reshaped itself into a more intimate setting, a space that somehow combined elements of both a traditional mead hall and an underwater grotto. The platform where they stood expanded to form a proper floor, though portions remained open to the water below. The merchandise grew organically from this surface. Seats that appeared to be formed from coral and driftwood but felt surprisingly comfortable. Tables seemingly crafted from mother-of-pearl and solidified sea foam. Above, the ceiling opened to reveal what appeared to be the ocean's surface far above, with filtered light creating shifting patterns across the chamber. Fish and other sea creatures occasionally swam through this watery ceiling, their forms distorted by the barrier between elements. My daughters have prepared refreshments suited to your nature, Aegir said, indicating a table where various vessels had appeared. Though different from Asgard's mead, our brew carries its own potency and pleasure. Thor approached the indicated table, where containers of various sizes awaited. Some appeared to be made from enormous shells, others from materials he could not identify. The liquids they contained ranged from transparent to opalescent, some still while others moved with gentle currents despite the vessels remaining stationary. Aev selected one particularly luminescent drink and offered it to Thor. This was created specifically for your visit. Essence of storm-tossed seas, captured at the moment lightning touches water. I thought it might resonate with your particular powers. Thor accepted the shell cup, noting how the liquid inside seemed to respond to his proximity. Tiny flickers reminiscent of lightning playing across its surface. When he drank, the sensation was extraordinary. Cool, yet carrying an internal heat, with flavors that evoked both the freshness of rain and the deep mineral richness of the ocean floor. A pleasant tingling followed the liquid down, spreading warmth throughout his body. Remarkable, Thorn acknowledged sincerely. Asgard's finest brewers would envy this creation. Aegir inclined his head in acknowledgement before selecting his own drink. A deep blue liquid that moved with hypnotic slowness within its container. They settled into the provided seating, which adjusted subtly to accommodate their forms. You come to my realm weary, Thunderer, Aegir observed after a comfortable silence. Not in body, perhaps, but in spirit. The endless vigilance of Asgard's protector leaves little room for restoration. Thor might have bristled at such a direct assessment from many others, but Aegir's ancient nature and the strangely soothing quality of his realm made defensiveness seem unnecessary. My father suggested something similar, he admitted, though weary seems an inadequate description for a sensation I cannot properly name. The sea has many words for states that land dwellers leave unnamed, Aegir replied. Perhaps what you experience is closest to what we call the pressure of constant depth, when water carries the weight of everything above, yet must remain fluid and responsive to all currents. The metaphor resonated with unexpected precision. Thor nodded slowly. That describes it well. The weight remains manageable, yet awareness of it never fully recedes. The ocean knows much about pressure, Aegir said, his voice taking on a quality that suggested wisdom shared rather than merely conversation continued. At certain depths, pressure could crush anything from the surface world, yet creatures born to those depths thrive, having developed entirely different relationships with such forces. Thorn considered this. Are you suggesting I should adapt to this pressure rather than seek its absence? A girl's expression shifted like sun through water. Perhaps instead that different pressures serve different purposes. The shore creature that ventures too deep will be destroyed, yet the deep creature brought suddenly to the surface may suffer equally. Each belongs in its proper place, moving between realms only with appropriate transition. The conversation continued in this vein as they shared more of Aegir's extraordinary beverages. Thor found himself speaking more openly than he typically would, sharing not just tales of recent battles, which would have been expected in Asgard's halls, but the quieter concerns that accompanied them, patterns of threat that suggested larger designs, questions about the best application of his considerable strength, even occasional uncertainties about the correct course of action. Aegir listened with the patience of tides, offering neither judgment nor immediate solutions, but rather perspectives shaped by eons of observation. His wisdom came not from strategies of battle, but from the deeper understanding that comes from containing multitudes within one's domain. The balance of opposing forces, the necessity of both storm and calm, the recognition that even the mightiest waves eventually return to stillness. As their conversation gradually shifted from the philosophical to the practical, Aegir finally addressed the unstated question of Thor's visit. You wonder why I extended invitation at this particular moment, he said, his tone indicating this was observation rather than question. Thor nodded. The timing seemed significant. The oceans have been restless of late, Aegir confirmed, his expression growing more serious. Not merely in physical manifestation, though sailors in Midgard have noted unusual patterns, but in deeper currents, not visible from surface realms. Restless in what manner? Thorn asked, automatically assessing potential threats to the realms under his protection. Aegir made a gesture like a wave reaching shore. Not immediately dangerous, at least not in the way you typically confront, more a shifting of ancient boundaries, a realignment of influences that have remained stable for millennia. He paused, considering his next words carefully. The ocean, Thor Odinson, is the great connector. All rivers eventually find their way to my domain. All realms, even fiery Muspelheim, share some contact with water in some form. Through these connections, my awareness extends to places beyond my direct influence, and these connections reveal concerning patterns, Thor concluded. DNA reveals change, Aegir corrected gently, change that is neither inherently threatening nor benevolent, but which requires attention, appropriate response, balance maintained through conscious action rather than forced resistance or passive acceptance. Thor frowned slightly. This sounds remarkably similar to warnings my father has shared recently about barriers thinning between realms, ancient powers stirring. Either mask. The All-Father's wisdom and mine occasionally flow in similar channels, though we perceive through different means, Aegir acknowledged. But I did not invite you here merely to echo Odin's counsel. Then why? Thor asked directly. Aegir's expression shifted again, this time to something Thor might have called compassion if seen on a more familiar face. Because the coming changes will require strengths beyond the merely physical, and because even the god of thunder requires renewal before facing new challenges. He rose from his seat with fluid grace. Come, there is something I wish to show you. With curious anticipation, Thor followed as Aegir led him through passages that seemed to reconfigure themselves as they walked. The architecture of the sea god's palace defied consistent description, sometimes appearing crystalline and precise, other times organic and flowing, but always with the underlying sense of being within a living entity rather than a constructed space. They emerged eventually into a vast circular chamber, unlike any Thor had yet seen in Aegir's realm. The floor was a perfect mirror of still water, so undisturbed that it perfectly reflected the domed ceiling above. This ceiling appeared to be open to the ocean itself, yet somehow contained, as if the water agreed to remain above, rather than flowing downward through what should have been an impossible barrier. Through this ceiling window, Thor could see the full majesty of Aegir's underwater domain. Vast schools of fish moved in synchronized patterns, their scales catching light from an unseen source. Larger creatures occasionally passed overhead, some recognizable from Midgard's oceans, others entirely unfamiliar. Plant life in extraordinary colors and forms swayed with underwater currents, creating a constantly shifting tapestry of motion and life. The Heart Pool, Aegir named the chamber, a place where the essence of the ocean can be experienced in its purest form. At the center of the chamber floated what appeared to be a large, perfectly constructed vessel. Not quite a boat, not quite a bed, but something that combined elements of both. Crafted from materials that resembled mother of pearl, driftwood, and solidified sea foam, it hovered just above the mirror-still water that formed the floor. Few outside my own kind have been invited to experience what this chamber offers, Aegir said, but the Thunderer has earned such privilege through past services to all realms, including the oceans. What exactly does it offer? Thor asked, intrigued despite his natural caution toward unknown magical environments. Rest, Aegir said simply, but not ordinary sleep. The Heart Pool connects directly to the deepest currents of the ocean, currents that existed before the formation of the realms as they are now known, currents that carry memories and knowledge from every age of existence. He gestured toward the floating vessel. One who reclines there, surrendering to the rhythm of these primal waters, may experience restoration beyond what any amount of ordinary rest could provide. Thor approached the vessel with measured steps, studying it carefully. This seems unusually generous, Lord Aegir. What does the ocean ask in return for such a gift? Aegir's expression showed approval at the question. Wise caution. The sea gives nothing without exchange. This is truth. He moved to stand beside Thor, both now looking down at the mysterious vessel. What the ocean asks is simple. Openness, willingness to receive, not just rest, but perspective. The waters that will embrace you carry the memory of all things, triumph and devastation, growth and decay, creation and destruction. These balanced forces maintain the whole. One who experiences this balance directly may find their own internal forces similarly aligned, and this alignment serves the ocean's interests, Thor pressed, still seeking the underlying exchange. A Thor who understands the necessity of both storm and calm serves all realms better than one who knows only how to summon thunder, Aegir replied. The oceans neither need nor desire your protection, Odinson. We existed long before Asgard and will remain long after. But we exist in relationship with all other realms, and that relationship prospers best when those who hold power wield it with complete understanding. Thor considered this carefully. The offer was tempting. His fatigue was real, despite his reluctance to acknowledge it fully. And yet, surrendering consciousness in an unfamiliar magical environment went against every instinct developed through centuries of maintaining vigilance against countless threats. Angier seemed to read his hesitation accurately. Mjolnir may remain at your side, Thunderer. Indeed, the hammer's essence has its own relationship with primal forces that the waters will recognize and respect. This concession eased Thor's primary concern. Mjolnir was more than a weapon. It was an extension of himself, attuned to threats, even when he might not be fully aware of them. The hammer had awakened him from deepest sleep before, when danger approached. It would serve similarly here if necessary. Very well, Thorn decided. I accept your offering, Lord Aegir, in the spirit of exchange you describe. Aegir nodded with solemn approval. Then prepare yourself. Remove armor that would restrict comfort, but otherwise do as feels appropriate. Thor removed his heavier outer armor, placing each piece carefully aside while keeping Mjolnir close. This done, he approached the floating vessel with decision rather than lingering hesitation. The sea god's explanation had convinced him that while caution was warranted, fear was not. He had bathed in the fires of dying stars and survived the coldest reaches of Jotunheim's eternal winter. The embrace of ancient waters seemed a lesser challenge by comparison. As Thor settled himself in the vessel, he was surprised by its perfect accommodation to his form, adjusting subtly until it supported him in ideal comfort, neither too yielding nor too firm. Mjolnir he placed beside him, its handle within easy reach should need arise. And should I expect? Thor asked, looking up at Aegir, who now stood at the edge of the pool. Expectation itself is the first barrier you must release, the sea god replied. The experience will be unique to you, shaped by what you bring to it. Some find visions, others insights without image. Some hear the voices of the deep, others feel the knowing without words. He made a gesture reminiscent of a wave breaking against shore. The only constant is the rhythm that underlies all waters, everywhere. Allow that rhythm to become yours, and all else will follow next. With these cryptic but somehow reassuring instructions, Aegir stepped back from the pool's edge. As he did so, the mirror-still water that formed the floor began to rise, not as droplets or splashes, but as a perfectly unified surface, elevating itself until it just touched the bottom of Thor's floating vessel. The contact created an immediate change. A gentle vibration passed through the craft and into Thor's body, not unlike the sensation of distant thunder, felt rather than heard, but steadier, more rhythmic. This vibration aligned itself with his heartbeat, adjusting until the two moved in perfect synchronization. Above, the ceiling window to the ocean depths seemed to draw closer, or perhaps his perception extended further into it. The movements of marine life became more pronounced, their patterns revealing harmonies previously unnoticed. Colors intensified while simultaneously becoming less distinct, as individual creatures, yielding to the impression of vast, coordinated motion. The ocean as a single conscious entity rather than merely a collection of separate beings. Thor felt his awareness expanding outward while simultaneously turning inward, a paradoxical sensation that might have been disorienting in other circumstances, but somehow felt natural in this environment. The boundaries between himself and his surroundings became less defined, not in a threatening way that risked loss of self, but in a manner that allowed perception beyond ordinary limits. The rhythm continued to build, not in volume or intensity, but in complexity. What had begun as a simple pattern revealed itself to contain countless variations and harmonies, all woven together in mathematical perfection. This was the heartbeat of the ocean itself, the primal pulse that had continued uninterrupted since the first waters formed in the early universe. Gradually, Thor became aware of a presence, or rather multiple presences, at the periphery of his expanded consciousness. These were not distinct entities, but rather concentrations of awareness within the greater whole, like eddies in a vast current. They observed him with curious attention that carried no threat, only interest in this unusual visitor to their realm. The daughters of Aegir, Thor realized, recognizing the 9 wave maidens who personified different aspects of the ocean's nature. Though he could not see them in ordinary visual terms, he sensed their distinctive essences: Himinglaver of the transparent waters, Dufa of the pitching wave, Blodugada of the bloodied water, Hifreng of the rising swell, Udur of the frothing wave, Bulga of the billow, Bara of the foam-flecked wave, and Kolga of the chilling billow. They circled his floating vessel, their movement creating subtle currents within the larger rhythm. Each contributed her own element to the experience, one bringing deeper peace, another heightened awareness, another connection to memories long submerged, another visions of possible futures. Together, they wove these elements into a unified experience, beyond what any single aspect could provide. Thor surrendered to their guidance, allowing his consciousness to flow along the currents they created. Time lost meaning as ordinary measurement, replaced by a different kind of tracking, based on cycles and patterns rather than linear progression. The persistent rhythm remained his anchor, preventing complete dissolution into the vastness, while still allowing unprecedented expansion. In this extraordinary state of awareness, Thor experienced the ocean's perspective on existence, its witness to the formation and transformation of worlds, its patience measured in geological time, its understanding of the essential unity underlying apparent separation. He perceived connections between realms that remained invisible from ordinary perspective, currents of influence flowing between worlds that seemed entirely separate when viewed from limited vantage point. The fatigue that had driven him to accept Ekir's invitation revealed itself fully in this expanded awareness. Not merely physical tiredness or mental strain, but a deeper imbalance between the forces that comprised his nature. Thor had always embodied power in its most direct manifestation, his connection to thunder and lightning representing the concentrated release of tremendous energy. Yet here, immersed in the ocean's rhythm, he experienced power of equal magnitude but entirely different character. The inexorable force of water that shaped continents, not through sudden impact, but through consistent presence. This recognition came without judgment. The ocean held no preference between sudden storm and gradual tide, seeing both as essential expressions of the same fundamental energies. What mattered was not which force predominated at any given moment, but rather the overall balance maintained through their alternation, just as the most violent tempest eventually yields to calm seas, and the most peaceful waters eventually gather energy for transformation. All states existed as temporary expressions within the greater cycle. As this understanding settled into Thor's consciousness, he felt a profound release, not of responsibility or purpose, but of the tension created by resistance to natural rhythm. The pressure he had carried, that weight of constant depth Aegir had named, did not vanish, but transformed, becoming a supportive presence rather than a burdensome one, a reminder of connection rather than isolation. The daughters of Aegir, sensing this shift, altered their movements around his vassal. Their circular pattern opened, creating a spiraling current that gradually drew Thor into even deeper communion with the ocean's essence. The ceiling window above seemed to dissolve entirely, allowing direct immersion in the vastness beyond, without the sensation of drowning or disorientation. In this deepest state, language and distinct thought receded. Thor existed in pure experience, the knowledge of being simultaneously a distinct entity and an integral part of something immeasurably greater, and its awareness expanded to encompass perspectives impossible to maintain in ordinary consciousness. The collective memory of all waters everywhere, the simultaneous perception of ocean depths and the thinnest fog, the understanding of how the same essence could manifest as solid ice, flowing river, or rising vapor. Throughout this extraordinary journey of consciousness, Mjolnir remained a steady presence at Thor's side, not merely as potential weapon, but as fellow traveler. The hammer's enchanted essence resonated with the primal energies they encountered, its connection to storm and lightning finding unexpected harmony with the ocean's currents. This resonance created its own insights, revealing how forces that might appear opposed, the lightning strike and the conductive water, were in truth complementary expressions of unified power. How long Thor remained in this state was impossible to measure by ordinary means. The experience seemed simultaneously brief as a single heartbeat and extensive as an age of the world. Throughout, the constant rhythm provided structure without limitation, allowing exploration without loss of essential self. Gradually, by processes too subtle to track directly, Thor felt his awareness begin a natural return journey, not through sudden withdrawal, but through a gentle reintegration of expanded perception with more familiar consciousness. The distinct presences of Aegir's daughters receded, though their influence remained as harmonics within the continuing rhythm. The ceiling window reformed, providing once again the more defined boundary between observer and ocean, while maintaining the essential connection established. As ordinary perception reasserted itself, Thor realized that his floating vessel had returned to its original position, the water that had risen to meet it now settling back into perfect mirror stillness below. His body felt both deeply rested and vibrantly energized, not the temporary invigoration of battle fury, but a more sustainable restoration that extended to levels he had not recognized needed healing. Aegir stood at the chamber's edge, his ancient face showing satisfaction but no surprise at whatever transformation he observed in his guest. "You have traveled far without moving, Thunderer," he noted, his voice once again carrying the rolling depth of waves against shore. Thor sat up slowly, maintaining contact with the vessel that had supported his extraordinary journey. "Far indeed," he agreed, his own voice seeming simultaneously more powerful and gentler than before, as if it too had found new balance. "I lack proper words to describe the journey. Words are poor vessels for such experiences," Aegir acknowledged. Better to allow the knowledge to settle like sediment, becoming part of your foundation rather than something merely carried on the surface. Thor nodded, gathering Mjolnir as he rose from the vessel. The hammer seemed to hold a subtle new resonance, its familiar weight somehow more completely integrated with his own being. "How long have I rested here?" he asked, realizing he had no reference for passage of time during his immersion. "By Asgard's measure, 3 full days and nights," Aegir replied. "By the ocean's measure, a single breath." His expression suggested this was not merely poetic comparison, but literal description of different temporal perspectives. Thor absorbed this information with slight surprise, but no alarm. The depth of restoration he felt justified such duration. "Your hospitality exceeded all expectation, Lord of Oceans," he said with genuine gratitude. "The debt incurred is substantial." Aegir made a gesture reminiscent of a wave smoothing a shore. "There is no accounting between forces of nature, Thunderer, only recognition of shared purpose despite different manifestations." His ancient eyes studied Thor with evident approval of whatever changes he perceived. "You came seeking rest, but have found something more valuable, perspective that will serve long after ordinary restoration would have diminished." Thor acknowledged the truth in this assessment. The experience had provided not merely the absence of fatigue, but a profound reorientation to the very nature of his power and purpose. The pressure of constant depth remained, but his relationship to it had fundamentally shifted. No longer weight to be endured, but context that gave meaning to his existence and actions. "Then, will I remember all that was revealed?" he asked, aware that experiences of such magnitude often faded when returning to ordinary consciousness. "Not as distinct memories," Aegir replied honestly. "The conscious mind cannot contain such vastness any more than a cup can hold the ocean, but the essence remains, integrated into your being rather than merely added to your knowledge." His expression shifted to something resembling a smile, though on his fluid features it manifested differently than human expression, "and should you wish to refresh that integration, my realm remains open to you. The path once traveled becomes easier to find again." This offer, extended with evident sincerity, represented significant privilege. Aegir rarely maintained ongoing relationships with beings outside his domain, preferring the company of his own kind and the countless creatures that populated his watery realm. That he would welcome future visits spoke to both respect for Thor specifically and recognition of greater patterns requiring cooperation across traditional boundaries. "I will remember that generosity," Thor promised, "and should the ocean ever require the thunder's aid, Mjolnir will answer." Their exchange of formal farewells followed patterns established by eons of diplomatic interaction between powers of their stature, phrases that acknowledged respective domains while affirming mutual respect, despite different natures and responsibilities. Throughout, Thor noted subtle differences in how he experienced these formalities. A deeper appreciation for their meaning beneath surface courtesy, a more nuanced awareness of the relationship between seeming opposites, represented by ocean depth and thunderous sky. When these ceremonial requirements had been properly fulfilled, Aegir personally escorted Thor back through his transforming palace to where the enchanted vessel awaited to carry him back to Asgard's shore. The boat, seemingly aware of its passengers' changed nature, had itself transformed. Still crafted of the same luminescent wood, but now adorned with subtle patterns that echoed the rhythm Thor had experienced in the heart pool. "The currents will carry you swiftly," Aegir assured him, as Thor stowed his few belongings and prepared for departure. though should you wish to extend your journey for further contemplation, the vessel will respond accordingly. Thor considered this option, tempted by the prospect of additional time immersed in the peaceful rhythm of Aegir's domain before returning to his responsibilities in Asgard. But the restoration he had experienced created not avoidance of duty, but renewed commitment to it, albeit from a transformed perspective that would influence how he fulfilled his role as protector of the realms. Swift return seems appropriate, he decided, though not due to anxiety about absence from my post. He touched Mjolnir, which hung once again at his belt. The hammer and I return not from necessity, but choice, carrying what was given here into service there. Hail Age Zed nodded with evident approval of this reasoning. Then may the journey reflect its purpose, swift yet measured, direct yet mindful. He made a gesture toward the water, which responded by forming a clear channel that would guide the enchanted vessel from his palace back to the transitional seas between realms. As Thor settled himself in the boat, Aegir offered a final observation that seemed to serve as both blessing and prophecy. The thunder that returns carries echoes of the deep. The lightning that strikes will remember the patience of water. When storm meets ocean in harmony rather than opposition, both fulfill their nature more completely. With these words still resonating in his consciousness, Thor felt the vessel begin its journey, responding to currents invisible to ordinary perception, but clearly established by Aegir's will. The tranquil motion immediately reconnected him to the rhythm experienced in the heart pool, though in less immersive form, a reminder rather than full reinitiation. As the ocean palace receded behind him, its fantastic architecture gradually dissolving into the misty boundary between solid form and liquid possibility, Thor found himself reflecting on the multiple meanings contained in Aegir's parting words. They described not just his personal transformation, but hinted at larger patterns unfolding across the realms. The changes both Odin and Aegir had referenced that would require new forms of response from those who stood as guardian. The return journey through the transitional waters between Aegir's realm and Asgard's shore provided ideal space for these contemplations. Unlike his outward journey, when his mind had gradually surrendered ordinary thought patterns to the ocean's rhythm, Thor now experienced an integration of that rhythm with more familiar consciousness, creating not confusion but unusual clarity that allowed simultaneous appreciation of multiple perspectives. The sky above transformed gradually from the unfamiliar star patterns of the deep ocean realm to the more recognized constellations visible from Asgard, though Thor perceived them differently now, not merely as fixed lights against darkness, but as expressions of the same fundamental energies that flowed through ocean currents below. The boundaries between elements revealed themselves as permeable rather than absolute, just as the distinctions between realms showed their underlying connections when viewed from sufficient perspective. As Asgard's golden shore appeared on the horizon, Thor felt not the resistant tension of duty reasserted, but the measured anticipation of purpose renewed. The god of thunder returned carrying the ocean's rhythm within him, not replacing his essential nature, but expanding it to include complementary understanding, storm and calm, impact and patience, immediate action and extended perspective. These no longer appeared as opposing approaches, but as complementary tools available for appropriate application. The enchanted vessel approached Asgard's dock with perfect precision, coming to rest against the pier with the gentlest contact. As Thor gathered his few belongings and stepped onto familiar territory, he felt the subtle shift in his awareness that came from crossing the boundary between realms. Yet the ocean's rhythm remained, integrated into his being rather than left behind at the threshold. Looking back at the vessel that had carried him on this extraordinary journey, Thor offered silent gratitude, both to the craft itself and to the ancient power whose domain he had been privileged to experience. The boat seemed to acknowledge this farewell, its luminescent wood pulsing briefly brighter before it turned of its own accord and began its return journey to its master's realm. Thor stood for a moment on Asgard's shore, Mjolnir at his side, watching the enchanted vessel recede into the distance. The hammer thrummed with subtle energy, its enchantment resonating with both the power of thunder that was its essence and the newfound harmony with ocean depths that their journey had established. "We return changed, old friend," Thor murmured to the weapon that had been his constant companion through countless adventures. "Not diminished or redirected from our purpose, but expanded in our understanding of how best to fulfill it." Mjolnir's response came not as words, but as a harmonic vibration that perfectly matched the ongoing rhythm carried from Aegir's realm. Confirmation that the hammer too had integrated the experience rather than merely witnessing it. This shared transformation suggested possibilities for applying their combined power in ways previously unconsidered. Not always through direct confrontation, but sometimes through patient influence. Not always through immediate impact, but sometimes through sustained presence. With this realization settling into comfortable certainty, Thor turned toward Asgard's golden city, visible in the distance beyond the shore. He would return to his responsibilities as protector of the realms, to the challenges Odin had foreseen and the threats that constantly emerged from various quarters. But he would do so carrying the ocean's perspective alongside the thunder's power. A combination that promised more complete fulfillment of his purpose than either aspect alone could provide. As Thor strode along the path from shore to city, his steps measured and purposeful, he felt an unusual sense of anticipation for whatever challenges awaited. Not the warrior's eagerness for battle, but the more complex readiness of one who sees multiple dimensions of each situation. The pressure of constant depth remained, but now provided context rather than constraint, foundation rather than limitation. The god of thunder returned to Asgard carrying the ocean's dream within him, not as burden but as gift, not as deviation from his nature, but as fulfillment of potential previously unrealized. Storm and sea, lightning and depth, impact and patience, forces seemingly opposed revealed their essential harmony when experienced from sufficient perspective. And as Thor passed through Asgard's golden gates, returning to the realm he had sworn to protect, the rhythm of Aegir's domain continued within him, a constant reminder that even the mightiest thunder sometimes finds its greatest strength not in resistance but in flow, not in opposition but in integration, not in conquering opposing forces but in recognizing the greater patterns that unite them all. Our Viking tale has now concluded. You will now hear the peaceful sounds of a crackling fire and gentle ambient noises that will continue throughout the night without any interruptions, helping you drift into a deep and restful sleep. May the stars of the northern sky watch over you, and may you find peaceful rest until the morning light. Sleep well, and good night.